does it mean that I avoid rock climbing? It depends on what I'm doing. So right now, I've yet to start the running program. I'm kind of in limbo where I'm just having fun and keeping in shape, maintaining my current shape. So I'll go rock climbing, absolutely. Or I'll limit it to once per week. And I mean, there are definite reasons to move around that are outside of just losing body fat. So, I mean, I try to take one long hike every week. Usually on a Sunday, I'll take a 3 to 5 hour long walk, which I think in addition to long meals with friends, like 2 to 4 hours, 3 or more friends, and if you look at the self-reported well-being research, which means happiness research, like long walks and long meals with friends. Those are the two constant determinants of self-reported well-being. So I try to include those as well. Any other questions? Yeah, that has nothing to do with my physical body. It's just to have a higher quality of life. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question was on the slow carb diet, can you replace beans? You don't have to include beans. The reason that I include beans or legumes of some type, my personal preference would be lentils or dal. Much prefer it to beans. The reason I include those is because when people go on any type of lowered carbohydrate diet, they run into problems when they don't consume sufficient calories. So you'll find people who are having a bagel and this, that, and the other thing for breakfast, and then they go to spinach and 2 eggs, and all of a sudden they go from 600 calories for breakfast to 150, and they feel lightheaded, they get irritable, and then they quit the diet. So I include the legumes or the beans to increase the caloric load. If you can do that via another mechanism, then that's fine. It doesn't have to be meat. But you just need to, one way to do that would be to consume more fat. So you could do that with something like macadamia nut oil. You wouldn't have to drink it, you could just cook using it. Or coconut milk, for example, which also has pretty high level of saturated fat, which is not a bad thing. But that would certainly up the caloric intake. So that might be another option. Avocado is fantastic. Yeah, avocado is really important. If you're following the slow carb diet, I do recommend supplementing with magnesium, potassium, among others, because you will lose quite a lot of unwanted retained water, but you will lose some electrolytes with that. And if you want to avoid potassium supplements, you just have avocados. They have, per unit, they have much more potassium than bananas. So I love avocado. I think they're a really great choice. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the case of red wine, that I don't think that is the causal agent. So it's very common, even among very intelligent researchers, that they reverse the arrows of causality, or they're simply associative and they take them to be cause and effect. So I think the red wine, if you find someone who drinks, let's say, red wine every evening, hypothetically, what might that correlate to? That might correlate to long dinners with friends. And then in fact, it's the long dinners with friends that lead them to live a longer period of time as opposed to the red wine. It's sort of an ancillary correlate. Yeah, exactly. Right. They're jogging to the liquor store to get their wine. Centenarians, 1 point on longer life. I think one of the cheapest, in this case free, things that you can do to extend life, particularly if you're a male, is to give blood. That is what one of the managers of the largest centenarian studies, I think it's at Boston University, I could be wrong about the university, that is his one major step that he has taken to extend his own life, is to donate whole blood to avoid toxic levels of iron and iron byproducts. So most men don't menstruate, unfortunately, for their longevity. I think that's actually one of the contributing factors to the differential between maximal female and male lifespan. every 3 months. I don't think they'll let you do it every month because you'll end up tripping over yourself. But once every 3 months or so, whole blood donation. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, bloodletting is coming back in vogue. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. 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 Right. Yeah. So food allergies, what have I learned? Because I didn't put much in the book about it. So I think most humans are gluten intolerant. Um, the fact of the matter is I do think you can get away with cheating once a week. Depends. If it's progressed and you have something resembling celiac or Crohn's disease, different story altogether. But I would say this much. If you're going to start anywhere, you need to get complete blood work. But you shouldn't make any changes based on an abnormality that you see once, because tests are really erratic. And what I noticed with the food allergy testing in particular, it was really easy to beat the test. So when I try to assess the reliability of a test, I try to beat the test, usually. Really easy to do with IQ tests as a side note. But the food allergy testing is very erratic, and if you just consume the same protein source for 1 or 2 months, let's say, with some regularity, you can produce a food allergy related to that, or kidney beans. And if you look at, let's say, Meridian Labs, which is a very common lab that does allergy testing in this particular area, at least a lot of the clinics will mail to Meridian, is there will be months at a time where everyone tests positive for egg whites and kidney beans. And then suddenly that'll stop. And it's like the epidemic has passed. And then they'll all test positive for something else. That would indicate to me that the test is unreliable. And I've had a number of friends who've gone to very expensive private physicians who've done allergy testing once and then been like, 75 foods you can't eat. And they end up becoming just this miserable mess and losing dramatic amounts of weight. So I would repeat the test, always repeat the test. I even sent multiple tests in with the same blood sample under different names, which you're not supposed to do. I did that, different results. In terms of gluten, I would say that depending on the severity of your response to gluten, you could probably get away with cheating once a week, which is what I do and what hundreds and several thousand people now do on the low-carb diet. So far, so good. There are people who disagree with that, and they'll say if you have gluten once, if you have one bite of gluten, then it's going to affect you for the next 30 to 60 days. Maybe. I just haven't observed those problems. So I think you could probably get away with cheating a little bit. No, it's okay. Hmm? Okay. Hmm? What are you eating exactly for breakfast? How are the eggs cooked? Okay. What were you eating for breakfast beforehand? Okay. And you've just been doing it for a few days. So here's my hypothesis. My hypothesis is that because you are consuming a predominantly carbohydrate diet for an extended period of time, I'm just assuming that the later meals are probably reflected by the breakfast, that you don't have, your body is only now starting to produce sufficient levels of things like not necessarily elastase, but the enzymes necessary to digest that fat and protein are just getting up to speed. So I would say consume more water. That could be part of the reason, because protein acts as a diuretic. So if you consume, let's say, 500 milliliters of cold water when you first got up before breakfast, it'll also accelerate fat loss. Do that first, and then I would say you could simply stick with it for a few more days, and then if that doesn't change, I would aim to you were saying you had eggs. What were the other components? I would make sure you get a little bit more roughage, so make sure you get the kale or spinach. Spinach is my preference for a whole host of reasons. Kale is fine, bok choy, whatever, it doesn't really matter. So that would be, but I would say that is probably what's going on. Your body just hasn't acclimated to consuming more fat and protein. And this is very common when men are trying to gain weight also. So Neil Strauss, who wrote The Game, among other things, is in the book, and he was a test subject for mass gaining. And he felt horribly sick for the first 5 days. And he's like, I can't do it. And I'd sit there and I'd be like, mouthful. I feel like a parent feeding a kid with a baby. It's pretty funny. And then he sent me a text the next week, so about 7 days later, and he said, I don't know what you've done, but this is amazing. I just polished off, 3 plates full of steak, ate my girlfriend's, ate her father's leftovers. He said, you've turned me into a meat processing machine. And it's because of the enzymes finally got up to speed. So I would give it a few more days, but make sure you're getting the roughage in the morning. Yep, you're welcome. Yep. Yeah, it's a big question. All right, so your child had some eczema issues, went to an ND, who's a pediatrician, who recommended a number of things, including fish oil, probiotics. What else? Digestive enzymes. What are my thoughts? So my thoughts are, number one, that most fish oil on the market is rancid by the time you consume it. So make sure you get really high quality fish oil, and it is in a dark glass container, preferably, or it's not exposed to light at least. It'll go rancid really quickly if it's exposed to light. And what I would do if you're going to buy capsules is, this sounds disgusting, but actually bite one of the capsules to let out the fish oil. And if it's horribly disgusting, it means it's rancid. You shouldn't consume it. That would be point number one. I don't consume much in terms of fish oil. I do consume cod liver oil for A and D at the same time. Vitamin D is very popular right now. It's all the rage, but people will get into trouble if they consume vitamin D without a commensurate increase in vitamin A intake. There are dangers with supplementation. That's part of the reason I've turned almost 180 back to whole foods, because scientists can only study what they can isolate, and you can get yourself into a lot of trouble consuming a lot of supplements. But as it relates to your son, I actually have a preference for prebiotics as opposed to probiotics, and that means consuming different types of fibers like inulin, which will then help you to produce the bacteria on your own as opposed to consuming the bacteria itself, if that makes sense. So I would just do a search for prebiotics. Probiotics are fine. I would recommend getting them in whole food if possible, which depending on the age of your son could be impossible. Okay, cool. But you could even make something like, well, we won't go into recipes, but if there's a way to get some type of fermented food or prebiotic into the diet, I think that would make sense. Otherwise, if it's working, I'd say keep doing it. Yeah. You're welcome.